The crew of the Ironclad had heard the whispers, the snickers, the barely concealed laughter from the pristine, polished fleets of the Galactic Dominion. Their ship was an old, patched-together relic, an Earth-built warship that had seen better days. Rust streaked its hull, its armor was a mishmash of scavenged plating, and its weapons were jury-rigged from whatever the crew could salvage. It had once been part of Earth's last defense fleet, before the Dominion conquered the Sol system and left humanity as little more than a forgotten species. Most humans were now laborers, soldiers for hire, or worse, slaves in the outer fringes of the galaxy. But the Ironclad still flew, and Captain Elias Kane intended to keep it that way. When they arrived at the Dominion's war games, a so-called friendly competition between fleets, their presence was an embarrassment to the High Command. Dominion admirals scoffed at the rust bucket from Earth. The sleek, energy-refined ships of the Dominion, the insectoid Corral, and the reptilian Zeth all gleamed under the artificial lights of the arena. "They brought that? Are they serious?" one Zeth officer sneered, his scaled snout curling in amusement. "The humans always were a pathetic race," a Dominion official chuckled. "We should have wiped them out instead of letting them scavenge the scraps of our empire." Elias didn't rise to the insults. He had no need. He simply exchanged a glance with his crew. Grizzled veterans who had been through hell and back. They had fought in the resistance. They had survived battles against overwhelming odds. And most importantly, they had a secret. The Ironclad wasn't just an old warship. It was a monster waiting to wake up. When the first mock battles began, the Dominion fleets effortlessly wiped out the simulated enemies. Their weapons were efficient, their maneuvers flawless. Then it was the Ironclad's turn. The Dominion fleet set up an unwinnable scenario, one meant to humiliate them. 5 warships, state-of-the-art, surrounding the Ironclad in a pincer maneuver. The objective? Survive for 5 minutes. "Let's show them what a real human ship can do," Elias muttered. The Ironclad's old systems flared to life. Ancient Earth technology, patched and reinforced over decades, came online. But unlike Dominion weapons, which relied on delicate energy shielding, human engineering was brutal, practical, and redundant. "Fire up the grav spike," Elias ordered. A weapon long thought obsolete, the grav spike was an old Earth War relic, an artificial gravity well that could bend space itself. It had been banned centuries ago. The Dominion hadn't encountered it in battle. They didn't realize what was happening until it was too late. The sleek enemy ships moved in for the kill, only for space itself to warp around them. Their engines stalled, their shields flickered, and suddenly, their advanced vessels were nothing more than tin cans caught in a cosmic maelstrom. Then the Ironclad's railguns roared. Unlike Dominion weapons, which relied on energy, humanity had perfected kinetic destruction. The railguns, old, ugly, and devastating, tore through the crippled enemy ships like paper. The audience watched in stunned silence. The laughter had died. The Ironclad didn't just survive the battle, it annihilated the Dominion's best. Elias leaned back in his chair as the wreckage of the so-called superior fleet drifted in the void. The old ship groaned, its engines humming as if pleased with itself. He smirked. "They laughed at our rusty ship," he murmured. "Let's see who's laughing now." The Dominion had underestimated humanity for the last time. And soon, they would learn why you never, ever count Earth out. The silence that followed the Ironclad's victory was deafening. On the Dominion's command deck, the high-ranking admirals and officials stood frozen, their expressions locked in disbelief. No one had expected the ancient Earth warship to last more than a minute, let alone obliterate a formation of top-tier Dominion vessels. Elias Kane sat back in his captain's chair, listening to the hum of his ship's systems. His crew exchanged glances, some suppressing grins, others staring at the screen with satisfaction. They had spent years tuning the ironclad, welding its armor with scavenged metals, overhauling its power cores with hybridized tech, and repurposing human ingenuity into something monstrous. It was ugly, it was old, and it was an absolute nightmare in battle. A transmission cut through the stunned silence. The Dominion's fleet marshal, a six-eyed, gray-skinned officer named Valor Kine, appeared on the comms. His voice was tight, controlled, but the rage and disbelief were evident in his tone. "Captain Kane," he said, the words forced. "That was unexpected." Elias leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "Unexpected?" He let out a dry chuckle. "That's one way to put it. Though, if I recall, this was a combat exercise. I believe we followed the rules." The sound of grinding teeth came through the transmission. The Dominion hated being humiliated. More than that, they despised the idea that humans, former subjects, nearly erased from history, had just proven themselves superior in direct combat. Valor hesitated for only a moment before regaining his composure. "You were not supposed to use outlawed technology?" Elias raised an eyebrow. "Outlawed by who? You?" He let the words hang in the air. "Ah, I see. You mean outlawed by the Dominion. But you see, we're not Dominion. We're human, and we use what works." The fleet marshal's jaw tightened. Behind him, Dominion officers whispered among themselves. Elias could tell what they were thinking. If humanity had one ship like this, how many more did they have? That was the beauty of it. There was only one ironclad. But they didn't know that. Elias wasn't about to tell them. Another voice cut through the channel. It belonged to Admiral Cathar, a towering, green-scaled Zeth warrior. His species had been part of the Dominion for centuries, and they had a long history of viewing humans as weak, primitive creatures. His slitted eyes narrowed. "You rely on outdated weapons and crude trickery," he hissed. "Your ship is a disgrace, a relic. If this were a real battle, your vessel would be reduced to scrap within minutes." Elias smirked. "A real battle, huh?" He glanced at his crew. "Well then, Admiral, why don't we find out?" A tense silence followed. Cathar's jaw clenched. He hadn't expected the challenge. The Dominion thrived on intimidation. They ruled through fear, through the certainty of their technological superiority. But what if that certainty was a lie? Valor Kine quickly stepped in. "That won't be necessary." His voice was sharp, laced with unspoken threats. "The Dominion does not engage in pointless conflicts." Elias tilted his head. "No? Because I'd say what just happened proves that any conflict with humans might not be as easy as you thought." The fleet marshal's nostrils flared. "Enjoy your victory while it lasts, Captain Kane, because you have just made an enemy of the most powerful force in the galaxy." The transmission cut. A slow grin spread across Elias's face. "Well," he mused, "that sounds like a problem for them." The crew chuckled. They knew what this meant. The Dominion couldn't let this stand. The ironclad had just become a symbol, a problem, a threat. And if they were coming for them? Well, Elias and his crew had plenty more surprises waiting for them. The ironclad drifted in the void, victorious but marked. Inside the ship, the crew worked with practiced efficiency, recalibrating weapons, reinforcing shields, and running diagnostics. Elias Kane stood at the bridge, arms crossed, watching the Dominion fleet in the distance. "They won't let this go," said Commander Lucia Voss, his second-in-command. She leaned against the control console, her dark eyes scanning the enemy ships. "We humiliated them. And the Dominion doesn't do humiliation." Elias nodded. "That's the fun part." A chuckle came from behind them. Chief Engineer Rourke, A barrel-chested man with grease-stained hands smirked. "They think we're some kind of secret superweapon program." He patted the bulkhead. If only they knew this old girl was held together with spit, duct tape, and pure human stubbornness. Elias smirked. "Let them think whatever they want. The longer they hesitate, the better." But hesitation wouldn't last long. The Dominion wasn't the type to lick its wounds and move on. They would come back, harder, angrier, and with orders to erase the ironclad from existence. A sharp beep interrupted his thoughts. Tactical Officer Lin tapped at his screen. "Captain, incoming transmission." Elias raised an eyebrow. "From the Dominion?" Lin shook his head. "Number unknown source. Secure channel." That got his attention. "Put it through," he ordered. The screen flickered. A moment later, a face appeared. Human. An older man, rugged with graying hair and a scar running down his left cheek. His uniform wasn't Dominion, nor was it part of any recognized Earth military. But the insignia on his shoulder... Elias felt a slow grin creep onto his face. "The ironclad," the man said. "Didn't think I'd ever see one of you in action again." Elias crossed his arms. "And you are?" The man smirked. "Call me Admiral Grayson, and I think it's time we had a talk." The bridge was silent. Everyone knew the name. Admiral Grayson had been one of the last commanders of Earth's resistance fleet, the fleet that had been wiped out when the Dominion took Sewell, or so everyone had thought. Elias exhaled sharply. "I was under the impression you were dead." Grayson chuckled. "That's what the Dominion wanted you to think." His expression turned serious. "You just made a hell of a mess out here, Kane. And now, the whole galaxy is watching." Elias didn't break eye contact. "Is that a problem?" Grayson shook his head. "Not for me, but it is a problem for the Dominion." He leaned forward. "And that's exactly why we need to talk. Because the ironclad isn't the only thing humanity still has up its sleeve." The line went dead. For a moment, the crew sat in stunned silence. Then Rourke let out a low whistle. "Well, shit." Elias Kane stood there, thoughts racing. The Dominion was coming for them. But maybe, just maybe, humanity wasn't done fighting yet. Elias Kane stared at the blank screen for a long moment, his mind whirling. Admiral Grayson. Alive. That changed everything. The bridge was silent, save for the hum of the ship's systems. The weight of what had just happened settled over the crew. The Dominion would come for them soon enough. But now, there was another factor in play. Lucia Voss was the first to break the silence. If Grayson's alive, that means the Resistance didn't die with Earth's fleet. Elias nodded. "That's what it sounds like." Rourke let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "All these years, we thought we were the last stubborn bastards still holding out. Turns out, we're just the loud ones." Tactical Officer Lin tapped at his console. "Sir, we just received new coordinates. Encrypted." He turned his chair. "It's from Grayson." Elias inhaled. There it was. The invitation. If Grayson was reaching out, it wasn't just to congratulate them on humiliating the Dominion. He wanted something. Or maybe he had something to offer? Lucia folded her arms. "It could be a trap." Elias smirked. "Could be. But if it's not?" She exhaled. "Then we might not be as alone as we thought." That was all Elias needed to hear. He turned to the helm. "Set course for the coordinates. Let's see just how deep this rabbit hole goes." The journey took them into the outer reaches, past Dominion-controlled space, into the lawless sectors where pirates and warlords ruled. These were the places the Dominion avoided, not because they lacked power, but because they considered it beneath them to waste resources on the fringe. The perfect place for a hidden resistance. the ironclad arrived in an asteroid field orbiting a dying red star. The coordinates led them to what looked like a broken-down mining station wedged between two massive asteroids. At first glance, it looked abandoned, dead. But as they approached, Lin frowned at his screen. "Sir, I'm reading power signatures. Cloaked ships," Elias smirked. "There it is." The moment they got within range, a transmission crackled through. "Ironclad, this is the Retribution. Stand by for docking instructions." Elias raised an eyebrow. Retribution. That was a name soaked in history. One of the last battleships to escape Earth before the Dominion wiped out the fleet. It was supposed to have been destroyed years ago. The crew exchanged glances. Lucia gave a nod. "Let's do this." As they docked, the crew of the ironclad stepped onto the station's cold metal floors. Armed soldiers, human soldiers, greeted them, their uniforms stitched together from old Earth military gear and scavenged armor. And at the end of the walkway, standing tall, was Admiral Grayson. He was older than Elias remembered from the history files, his face lined with years of battle and loss. But his presence was unmistakable. Elias stopped a few feet away. "I've got to say, Admiral," he said, "you're supposed to be dead." Grayson chuckled. "So are you." He looked at the ironclad behind them, then back at Elias. "Damn good work out there, but you've kicked the hornet's nest now." Elias smirked. "Wouldn't be the first time." Grayson's expression hardened. "Number. But this time, you've done more than embarrass the Dominion." He motioned for them to follow. "You've started something, and we need to make sure it doesn't go to waste." They walked deeper into the station, past soldiers, engineers, and pilots. Humans, all of them preparing for something bigger. Lucia glanced at the stockpiles of weapons and ships. "How long have you been building this up?" Grayson exhaled. "Longer than you'd believe." He stopped at a massive viewport overlooking the asteroid field. And there, hidden in the shadows, was a sight that made Elias's breath catch. A fleet. Not a scavenged fleet. Not a pirate armada. A human fleet. Old warships refitted, stealth bombers, even what looked like a half-finished dreadnought. Grayson turned to Elias. "The Dominion thinks they own the galaxy." He nodded toward the ironclad. "You just proved they can be beaten." His voice dropped lower. "Now let's show them what happens when humanity fights back." Elias stared out at the fleet, a slow grin forming. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was war. Elias Kane took a slow breath, his eyes locked on the fleet before him. Humanity's last stand wasn't over. It had only been waiting, hidden in the dark. The Dominion thought they had crushed Earth, that they had wiped out its resistance, but here, floating in the shadows of an asteroid field, were warships that had defied extinction. He turned to Admiral Grayson. "How many ships do you have?" Grayson's scarred face was unreadable. "Not enough." Elias smirked. "That's always the answer." Grayson nodded. "We've been building for years, raiding Dominion supply chains, stealing tech, refitting whatever we can. But our numbers are nothing compared to theirs." His voice lowered. "That's why what you did with the ironclad is so damn important." Elias raised an eyebrow. "You mean embarrassing the Dominion on a galactic stage?" Grayson's lips curled into a small grin. "I mean proving that they're not invincible." He crossed his arms. "The galaxy's been under Dominion rule for so long that everyone's forgotten what it's like to fight back. But you just reminded them." Lucia Voss, standing beside Elias, frowned. "So what's the next move?" Grayson turned, walking toward a holotable. The lights flickered to life, displaying a star map. "This," he said, pointing to a system on the edge of Dominion-controlled space, is Tyrus 9. It's a mid-tier Dominion outpost, not heavily guarded, but it's important. It supplies fuel and resources to several frontline fleets. If we take it, we send a message. Elias studied the map. You want to hit the Dominion where it hurts. Grayson's expression hardened. I want to remind the galaxy that humanity isn't done. A long silence filled the room as Elias considered the plan. The Dominion wouldn't expect an attack, not from humans. They would see the ironclad stunt as an isolated incident, an annoyance. But if they struck again, if they took Tyrus 9, then the Dominion would know that humanity wasn't just surviving. It was fighting back. Elias finally exhaled. All right, he said, a slow grin forming. Let's start a war. The preparations took days. The ironclad underwent repairs, its hull reinforced, its weapons checked and double-checked. In the hangars of the hidden station, pilots trained, soldiers prepared for boarding actions, and engineers worked to bring more ships online. The Resistance wasn't an army, not yet. But it was something dangerous. It was human. Elias stood on the command deck, watching the controlled chaos. Lucia approached, her expression serious. This is bigger than us, Elias. He nodded. I know. She hesitated. And if we lose? He met her gaze. Then we make damn sure they never forget we fought. Lucia exhaled, then smirked. Good answer. When the fleet finally moved, it was silent, slipping through the black of space like ghosts. The Dominion had grown complacent. They had beaten humanity before. They didn't expect them to come back. But they would learn. The hard way. Tyrus 9 hung in the void like an unguarded prize, its orbital defenses minimal, its Dominion garrison running routine patrols with the arrogance of an empire that believed itself untouchable. That arrogance would be their downfall. Elias Kane stood on the ironclad's bridge, arms crossed, as the final countdown ticked away. All ships in position, Lucia Voss reported. No signs they've detected us. On the holomap, the human fleet was a ghostly cluster of red blips weaving through the asteroid belt surrounding Tyrus 9. The Dominion patrols followed predictable routes, leaving gaps wide enough for a strike team to slip through. Elias studied the Dominion fleet. A handful of corvettes, one capital ship, likely the station commander's personal cruiser, and a smattering of supply freighters. Nothing compared to what the Dominion could deploy if they had warning. But that was the key. They wouldn't get any. He tapped the comms panel. Grayson, are your boarding teams ready? Locked and loaded, the Admiral's gruff voice came through. Just give the word. Elias turned to Lucia. Launch the assault. A second later, the ironclad's engines roared to full power, and the fleet surged forward. The attack was surgical, brutal, and human. Railguns thundered in the darkness, kinetic rounds shredding Dominion hulls before their shields could even power up. Missiles streaked through the void, striking fuel depots and key infrastructure points. By the time the Dominion sounded the alarm, half their defenses were already crippled. Elias guided the ironclad into the heart of the battlefield, its rusted hull absorbing glancing shots as its oversized railguns punched holes through the Dominion's sleek, fragile ships. Unlike their enemies, the humans didn't rely on delicate energy shields. Their ships were built to take a beating and keep going. The Dominion's capital ship, the Valor's Pride, scrambled to rally a counterattack. Enemy flagship is locking weapons on us, Lynn reported. Elias grinned. Let them. The Valor's Pride unleashed a volley of plasma fire, only for the ironclad to absorb the hits, its reinforced hull holding firm. Then, with a single brutal shot, its main railgun tore straight through the Dominion ship's reactor core. The explosion lit up the void like a dying star. That was the breaking point. With their leader dead and their station in flames, the remaining Dominion forces ran. But the humans weren't done. Grayson's teams breached the station, storming through the corridors, taking key control points in a ruthless sweep. Within minutes, the Dominion officers were either dead, captured, or fleeing in escape pods. Tyrus 9 belonged to humans now. On the bridge of the captured station, Elias watched as resistance fighters raised an old Earth banner over the command console. It was a symbol no Dominion officer had seen in years. Lucia stood beside him. "We did it." Elias exhaled, a slow grin forming. "Yeah, we did." The first human victory against the Dominion in decades. The galaxy would hear about this, and the Dominion would never forget. The news spread faster than light. Tyrus 9 had fallen, a Dominion stronghold, a vital supply hub, taken by humans. It was impossible. It was unthinkable. And yet, there it was. The Dominion's ships had burned, its garrison had surrendered, and its banners had been torn down, replaced with something the galaxy hadn't seen in decades. The symbol of Earth. Elias Kane stood on the station's command deck, watching the chaos unfold across the holoscreens. Dominion transmissions flooded the network, scrambling for explanations. The official statements called it an isolated act of terrorism. But the whispers in the shadow markets, the back channels, the places where rebellion brewed, they called it something else. A spark. Admiral Grayson stepped up beside him, arms crossed. "We did more than take a station, Kane." His grizzled face was unreadable. "We just changed the war." Elias smirked. "I thought you said we didn't have a war." Grayson chuckled darkly. "We do now." Lucia Voss approached, her face grim. "Dominion fleets are mobilizing. They're calling this an act of treason. We won't hold this place for long." Elias nodded. They had expected this. The Dominion was predictable. Crushing dissent was second nature to them. Soon, their response would come. A fleet, maybe 10, maybe 100. They didn't just want Tyrus 9 back. They wanted to erase the idea that humans could fight back. Elias wasn't about to let that happen. He turned to the holomap, studying the surrounding systems. Tyrus 9 was important, but it wasn't the real prize. It was bait. "What's the nearest Dominion-controlled world?" he asked. Lynn, their tactical officer, checked his screen. "Yalara 3, industrial colony, weapons manufacturing." He hesitated. "Heavy defenses, though," Elias grinned. "Perfect," Lucia's eyes widened. "We just took a station, and now you want to hit a world?" Elias leaned against the console. "They expect us to sit here and defend Tyrus 9 like it's the only thing we've got." He tapped the map. "But what if, instead of waiting for them to crush us, we hit them again?" Grayson exhaled. "You want to take the fight straight to them?" Elias met his gaze. "I want to show them that humans don't just survive." His voice was cold. "We win." A silence passed through the room. Then, slowly, Grayson grinned. "Well," the Admiral said, "let's give the Dominion something to fear." Preparations moved fast. The ironclad was patched up, its railguns reloaded, its hull reinforced with whatever scrap they could scavenge. The human fleet, now bolstered with captured Dominion tech, was running at full capacity. And in the darkness beyond Tyrus 9, the Dominion fleet was coming. But they wouldn't find what they expected. They would find nothing. Because the humans wouldn't be there to defend the station. They would already be on the move. They would already be striking again. The ironclad led the fleet away from Tyrus 9 under cover of darkness, slipping through the void like a predator on the hunt. When the Dominion arrived in full force, hundreds of ships, a show of overwhelming might, they found the station barely defended. Only a skeleton crew remained, broadcasting a single, taunting message on repeat. "You're too late." The Dominion had expected to crush a desperate defense. Instead, they had walked into an empty battlefield. And while they were busy reclaiming Tyrus 9, Elias Kane and his fleet were already en route to something far more important. Yalara 3. The industrial world wasn't just a target. It was the lifeline of the Dominion's war machine. Factory cities stretched across the surface, churning out weapons, armor, and munitions for the Dominion's never-ending conquests. Take Tyrus 9, and you made a statement. Take Yalara 3, and you crippled the Empire's ability to fight. On the Ironclad's bridge, Elias studied the tactical display as they neared the planet's orbit. Unlike Tyrus 9, this place was fortified. Orbital defense platforms, ground-to-space artillery, and a standing fleet patrolling the skies. A direct assault would be suicide, which is why they weren't attacking like the Dominion expected. "Voss," Elias said, glancing at his second-in-command. "You ready?" Lucia grinned. "Oh, this is going to be fun." The fleet didn't slow as it reached Yalara 3. They accelerated, straight toward the Dominion defenses. Alarms screamed across the planet. Fighters scrambled, turrets locked on, and the Dominion fleet formed up for battle, believing that the humans were about to engage in a full frontal assault. They were wrong. Just before they hit the engagement zone, the Ironclad and its fleet executed a maneuver that no Dominion ship would ever attempt, because no Dominion ship was stupid enough to try it. They dove straight into the planet's atmosphere. The Dominion fleet hesitated for a split second, uncertain, confused, before pursuing. But that hesitation was all the humans needed. The Ironclad tore through the clouds, its rusted hull shaking under the pressure, its engines screaming as it dropped like a meteor toward the surface. On the ground, Dominion officers barely had time to react before the sky opened up and death rained down. Human dropships burst from the fleet, deploying strike teams into factory districts, hitting fuel depots, sabotage crews slipping into Dominion strongholds before alarms could even finish blaring. And above them, the Dominion fleet found itself in chaos. The Dominion never fought inside atmosphere. Their ships were designed for space combat, delicate shields, fragile hulls that couldn't withstand the turbulence of a planet's gravity well. But human ships? They were built to survive the impossible. Railguns fired point-blank at enemy ships struggling against the planet's pull. Dominion fighters swerved wildly, unused to the storm force winds. And in the middle of it all, the Ironclad roared, its brutal, ancient weapons tearing through the Dominion's finest, like they were nothing. On the ground, the resistance forces fought like demons. Elias himself led the charge through a Dominion weapons facility, his pulse rifle slung over his shoulder, his team blasting their way through enemy defenses. Explosions rippled through the complex as fuel lines ruptured, fire and chaos consuming everything. He tapped his comms. "Status?" Lucia's voice came through. "Main factories are down. Dominion Command Center is burning." A pause. Then, with a grin, "We just stole their own weapons and turned them on their security forces." Elias chuckled. "Now that's poetic justice." The Dominion was in full retreat. In hours, humanity had done what no species had dared to attempt. They hadn't just won a battle. They had ripped the Dominion's war machine apart, and the galaxy was watching. On the bridge of the Ironclad, Elias leaned against the console, watching the fires still burning on the surface of Yalara 3. The resistance fleet regrouped, Dominion prisoners were secured, and the stolen munitions were loaded aboard their ships. Admiral Grayson stepped beside him. "They'll send everything they have now." Elias nodded. "Good." Grayson chuckled. "You want them to come after us?" Elias smirked. "I want them to chase us." He turned to the star map. "We just cut off one of their arms. Now we start carving up the rest." Lucia stepped forward, crossing her arms. So where do we hit next? Elias looked at the Dominion-controlled systems flashing red on the map. Then he grinned. Everywhere. The Dominion response came faster than expected. Within days of the fall of Yalara 3, Dominion fleets swarmed the sector, burning their way through the void in search of the human fleet. News spread across the galaxy. Planets under Dominion rule whispered of defiance, while rebel cells once too afraid to act suddenly found hope. But hope wasn't enough to win a war. Elias Kane stood on the ironclad's bridge, arms crossed, as Admiral Grayson studied the incoming tactical reports. The Dominion's not just hunting us, Grayson muttered. They're purging entire systems. They're trying to make an example of anyone who supports us. Lucia swore under her breath. Bastards. Elias exhaled. This was always the risk. They had struck the Dominion in ways no one had before. So now the Empire would do what it did best. It would crush, burn, and erase, unless they stopped it. Elias turned to the map. What's the Dominion's biggest weakness? Lynn, their tactical officer, hesitated. Aside from their arrogance? Elias smirked. Aside from that? Grayson stroked his chin. Logistics. He pointed to the holomap. They rule through fear, not loyalty. Their fleets rely on supply lines, their soldiers on credits. If we hit their economic centers, we do more than hurt them. His eyes darkened. We make it impossible for them to fight. Elias nodded. Then we take the fight to the heart of the Dominion. Lucia frowned. You're talking about Core Prime. The capital world, the seat of Dominion power, heavily fortified, unassailable. Grayson shook his head. That's suicide. Maybe, Elias admitted, but they expect us to run. They expect us to keep fighting on the fringes. He leaned in. What if, instead, we hit them where they feel safest? A silence stretched through the room. Then Grayson grinned. Hell, he exhaled. I always wanted to go out in a blaze of glory. Lucia smirked. Then let's make it count. The ironclad led the charge. Human ships emerged from slipspace on the edge of the Dominion capital, a ragtag fleet against the Empire's might. Orbital defense stations spun to life, warships moved to intercept, alarms blared across the planet below, but Elias and his crew hadn't come to conquer. They had come to finish the war. Lucia launched a data spike, overriding civilian broadcast networks across the Dominion. Every world under their control, every colony, every backwater station, suddenly, all saw the same thing. Elias Kane, standing on the bridge of the ironclad, staring directly into the feed. This is humanity, he said, and we are not afraid. Behind him, Dominion warships exploded as the human fleet tore into their lines. The ironclad, the ship that had started it all, weaved through the chaos, its railguns punching through enemy hulls with ruthless precision. Admiral Grayson led the ground assault. His forces stormed key control centers, disabling Dominion command structures. The Empire's leaders cowered in their fortresses, watching in horror as the fight came to their doorstep. And across the galaxy, watching from their screens, billions saw something they had never imagined possible. The Dominion bleeding, falling, dying. The battle lasted hours. The Dominion fought like a cornered beast, desperate and brutal. But for the first time in history, they were on the losing side. Rebellions ignited across the galaxy. The Dominion's fleets, stretched too thin, fractured. Planets rose up. The empire that had ruled for generations found itself crumbling. And at the heart of it all, Elias Kane stood on the shattered bridge of the Dominion flagship, looking down at the planet below. Smoke rose from the capital. The Dominion banners burned. Lucia approached, blood on her face, a wild grin in her eyes. It's over. Elias exhaled. No, he said. staring at the stars beyond. It's just beginning. The Dominion was finished. Now they had to build something better. And this time, humanity would not be forgotten. This time, they would rule the stars.